account manager, but I also work on our development team at TCI and help to write many of the lessons that are in the programs. I'm a former classroom teacher from Lakota, down south, 100 miles or so down south, where I taught 7th and 8th grade social studies there in Lakota for 12 years. And like I said, used the program extensively. So my goal for us in our time today is to really spend a lot of time talking pedagogy, and certainly we'll use features from the TCI program, and I'll make sure that I call out where to be looking for different resources. But I really want to have a focus on just good teaching practices and how you can use this strategy in a variety of ways, not only with the lessons that we develop, but at a moment's notice if you needed to, because sometimes when you're teaching social studies, events occur and you want to take advantage of them as a teacher. So the visual discovery strategy is an excellent one for us to be able to do that. So with that in mind, let me give you a little bit of background on the visual discovery strategy. The idea behind this strategy is it transforms the lecture into from a very passive kind of a teaching experience to much more student-centered. And this is going to build throughout the lesson. Students start by analyzing an image, pulling out details, but what they do with it later will drive them into their content, and eventually will ask for them to interact with it in some manner. So there's lots of different permutations of the visual discovery type of strategy, and I'm going to showcase many of those in the time that we have. So first, let me talk about where it sits within all of the 6 different strategies that we have. So there are 6 different strategies in all TCI programs from K-12 social studies. Visual discovery is just one of them. There are lessons that are very much built around body kinesthetic exercises, what we call an experiential exercise, lessons that are built around a writing product, what we call writing for understanding, discussion-oriented lessons that are called response group, lessons where students are collaborating on a product or a project over an extended period of time called problem-solving group work, and then finally, lessons called social studies skill builders, where students are learning the differences between content and skill development, but also doing them at the same time together. The one that we're going to focus on right up there in the upper left-hand corner is very engaging, and I think if you've used this strategy before, you'll really enjoy it if you haven't. Now, where to find these strategies? When you log into your TCI account and you click on the content area, you can see a screenshot of it here. I'm going to do it live in a second, but you'll be able to note where the strategies are located. One thing that you'll want to do is to make sure it's checkmarked in your modify view, and then you'll look for it in the lesson title itself. So I'm going to use my program here as an example. And when I go into my Pursuing American Ideals, which would be the high school US program, here's the modify view, there's the teaching strategy. And then when you scroll through your content page, you'll see it listed for each lesson. So there's writing for understanding, there's skill builder, there's response group, experiential exercise, and you'll see all 6. Doesn't matter what program you're using, you're going to see all 6 that are in there. So let's find one that says visual discovery. Oh, right here. There's one on reconstruction. That's a visual discovery. And usually you can make a pretty good bet that there's probably going to be one per unit somewhere. Somehow a whole lesson will be built around visuals. And if not a whole lesson, certainly part of it will. Like Matt said, sometime we put visuals at the very beginning of lessons and the previews, and sometimes later in the lesson as processing assignments. So that's where you're going to locate them. When you go through and you look at the lesson guide itself, it will give you a description of how students will engage with that. But I'm going to begin by asking a question to you, and I'd love for you to be able to use chat if you could. I want you to think about what we're trying to transform. Now, when I was a classroom teacher, I loved doing a lecture every now and then. I loved listening to lectures. I think a lot of social studies teachers, especially secondary social studies teachers, like a good lecture, or at least likes giving one or listening to one. So what are some advantages to giving a lecture? Why do people do it? Why do you do it? What's an advantage of a lecture? And if you could, I want you to kind of compose a thought, pop it in there in the chat. Love to see that chat just totally light up with all kinds of answers. So let me give you about 60 seconds or so to think and type. Yeah, I like Daniel said, it's efficient, exposing students to key vocabulary terms, control the material. Difficult concepts can be explained and broken down. Matthew says it can lead to classroom discussion. Yep. Turn the textbook material into a story. Love that, Jennifer. Yeah, one of my favorite professors at Miami was the former president himself, and he taught history of Ohio. And when I would sit in his lectures, he did everything through a story, and absolutely loved it. Very compelling when someone's a good storyteller and they're lecturing content. Yeah, so I see lots of really good answers in there. And one of the answers that I saw that I especially liked was, it's a good mix. Yeah, you can't use the same instructional approach or strategy for every piece of content, and certainly don't want to do that for every lesson. So the lecture definitely has its place, but how can we amp it up? And that's really what the visual discovery strategy is about. We're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The visual discovery still has those elements of a lecture, but they're supercharged in a way that are really going to help your students to become engaged. But there's criteria. Design criteria. When I sit down to write a lesson for TCI, or any of our developers do, one of the things that we try to look at is, when we're building a lesson around a strategy, we want to build it around best practices that will get the most out of it. So there are 5 of them for this strategy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through them with you, and we're going to model parts of it together. Now, one of my favorite people in the world is a man who's pictured right here, Kelly Shafsky, who was an original developer at TCI and wrote so many of the lessons that we still have in our program. And Kelly is a dynamic personality. He is the one that really kind of coined these steps of a visual discovery, and they start simple, and we're going to build to much more complex. So it starts with the most basic and very simple thing, and that is, arrange your classroom so that when you project the images, they are as large and as clear as possible. And that can mean actually different things in today's classroom in the 21st century. When I was teaching in 92, that meant using the slide projector and pulling it back as far as I can in the classroom so that the picture would take a whole wall. But in today's classroom, you can do this in a number of different ways. So for example, you can share your slide deck with students so that they have it on their screen and it's nice and big for them, especially if you're doing virtual work or Zooms or Google Meets or whatever you might be using. That's also something that makes it a little bit easier for you to have the images nice and big for a student. And when I say for the students, you want an individual student to be able to see every aspect of the screen, because you want to use all of that real estate when you show these pictures that are there. So that one's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, but unfortunately, oftentimes that is the one point of failure that happens immediately. So if you've got a classroom, let's say, and you've got them in desks and rows, and you've got a picture that has a lot of intricate details, just think about like the picture that we can see here in the background of the Trail of Tears, famous painting on the Trail of Tears. There's a lot of details and faces and things like that. Well, if the student is sitting in the back of the class, how can they make out the details at the bottom? So sometimes the most basic is, and the easiest thing to overcome becomes the stumbling block. So get them out of your seats sometimes, even if only for a few minutes. I'm not saying you have to necessarily rearrange your desks in rows, especially if you're a traveling teacher and you're in a science class where they've got the desk bolted down or something like that. But get them out of the seats and have them come up to the front of the class, if but just for a few moments, to be able to do the first steps of the visual discovery. So there's different ways in which you can accomplish the same task, but think about that being your number one, and that is make sure that the students are able to see that image live, large and clear. Second, let's also focus in on what kinds of images that you want to use. And when you're using pictures, when we develop a lesson, we look at the lesson goals and we pick images that fit the lesson goal. So we're not necessarily just picking the first picture that we see. So if we were covering, say, the civil rights, and we had two pictures that we could show, let's say we could show a sit-in as one picture, or we could show the March on Washington as another. Is there one that's better, one that would be more powerful? It really depends on what your lesson goals are. If you're wanting to show how the civil rights movement led to civic action, maybe the sit-in is the better picture. If you're wanting to show the enormous movement that started as a result of some key leaders in the civil rights organizations, then maybe the March on Washington is the better picture. So it really depends on what your goals are for the lesson, but you want to use powerful images to represent those concepts. So for example, let's take a look at a few of them here together. So the signing of the Magna Carta. If you were to pick an image on the signing of the Magna Carta, which would you go with, left or right? Put it in chat. Which would you go with, left or right? Both of them actually have the subject matter of the Magna Carta, but which one do you think is the better picture? A lot of people saying right. Left is more dramatic, but the right is more clear. Yeah, so again, it's going to really depend on what your goal is. If I'm wanting to focus, say, on the primary source, and we're going to take a look at the Magna Carta right afterwards, then maybe the right side is the better one, because it is, very clear that there's a document that's being placed in front of the king. On the left-hand side, again, it's very dramatic. There's emotion. You can actually see what appears to be movement taking place. So the results, perhaps, or what's leading up to, what's causing the Magna Carta to be instituted is perhaps the goal of what you're trying to get across. Then that is definitely the better image. Here's another one, the bubonic plague. So if you were covering the bubonic plague in class, which of the two would be the best picture to show how many people were affected? A lot of people saying the right. And we see scenes of death there, of course, so many people laid out. On the left, we see an army of, for lack of a better term, an army of the dead that is attacking the armies of Europe right there. So again, look at the images and just consider, especially if you're coming up with your own strategy, your own activity that you're going to use visuals with, really take care to determine what pictures you want to use and what's your goal. What's the connection between your goal? So here's the 100 Years War as another image. Now, I want you to look at this picture collage that I have here on the screen from left to right. And let's see if you can make a connection between all three of these pictures right here. If you can make a connection between all three of those pictures, pop it in there. Ron Hatton said detectives. Ron, I'm going to pick on you, and I want you to go on mute or off of mute if you could for a second. Ron, can you hear me? Ron, are you able to go off of mute? Maybe not. How about Joe Decker? Joe Decker, can you go off of mute? Can I hear you?
Hear me okay?
Yeah, I sure can. All right, Joe, you said detectives too. Of the detectives that are on here, which one's your favorite?
Scooby-Doo.
Absolutely, right? The mystery gang, right? The mystery machine. They're all detectives here. We've got I think it's a Pokemon detective on the right side over there. I don't know what the name of that Pokemon is. And Joe, who's there? Do you know who that is in the middle? I know it's Idris Elba, but what
I think that
role?
was the show Luther.
Yes, that's it. So we've got three detectives, groups of detectives there. And the reason that I'm showing that is because when you get to the next step, you want to ask carefully sequenced questions that lead to discovery. And the way that that happens is a lot like a detective goes after a mystery. So think about your favorite mystery or detective or whatever it might be. And I'm going to tell on myself and tell you that my favorite detective was Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote in the 1980s. Now, you didn't want to be a cousin or related to Jessica because you were likely to be accused of murder at some point. But when Jessica would solve a mystery, what she would always do, and what all good investigators do, is at the scene of the crime, the very first thing that you do is you collect evidence. That's level one. And then you begin making interpretations of that evidence. So, for example, in Fall River, Massachusetts, in the late 19th century, a man and a woman were found dead. And the man found on a couch was struck some 11 times in the head and the neck with a sharp instrument. And he was struck on the left side of his body. Now, in front of him is about 20 feet to the window. So that's him. Upstairs in a bedroom, away from a door where a bed is placed on the other side of a door, and on the other side of the bed, facing a wall, a woman's found laying face down, and her wounds are on the back and side of her right side of her head. So when investigators came to the scene, they collected all these different sorts of evidence. This ended up being the case of the 19th century. It's the Lizzie Borden case. They quickly determined that the killer was what? Left or right-handed, based on what I told you. Is the killer left or right-handed? Mr. Borden found on the couch, his wounds are on the left side of his body. Mrs. Borden upstairs, facing a wall, down on the ground. Hers are on the back right side of her head. Yes, the killer, they determined, was right-handed. So we gather evidence, we interpret that evidence, and then we make a claim. Now, in that case, there were only two people in the house at the time, and Lizzie was one of them. The other was Maggie Sullivan, the maid. The police determined that they felt that it was Lizzie that was responsible for the death of her stepmother and father, and they accused her of a crime. Of course, they put her on trial, and she was found innocent. But that creating a claim is that indictment. That's when the police took the step of saying, all right, we think it's her. This is all the evidence that we have. This is the interpretations that we have to support it. They make that claim. Well, when you look at a picture and you use that with students, it happens the very same way. So let's start with that. Let's look at this picture right here. And we're going to start by gathering evidence. Now, when you gather evidence using a picture, we're going to try to gather it by detailing what we see. So if you were in this picture, you were in that, it was 3D and you could touch something, it was tactile. What are things that you could touch that you see in this picture? I want you to type as many as you can in 30 seconds. Go. hope we're wearing gloves. Yes. So we see people. We've seen someone even pointed out they see rebar. I didn't even notice that on the initial glance over here, but yeah, we see rebar over there. We see people's faces. We see different jackets, sledgehammer, graffiti, see lots of different details. And when we gather all of that visual information, think about everything that people have been putting there in chat. Do you see anything on the list there that you didn't see on your first glance? And oftentimes there will be something that you may have missed that somebody else points out. So this is a really important place when you're using this image or an image with your students, is at that very outset, taking some time to really detail the evidence that's in the picture, because pictures have so much to tell us if we will listen. And we've got to listen with our eyes. So we're going to really pull those details out by gathering that visual evidence. Now, there's different ways in which you could do this. So for example, I just had you do one by typing up a bunch of things that you see. Another example would be to divide the class into different teams. Perhaps you say, all right, A through K, if your last name is A through K, you are going to focus on the upper left quadrant and the lower left quadrant, and M through Z, you are going to focus on the right quadrants. And I want you to tell me what you see in the pictures so that everyone has a task. So you appoint them a particular spot to focus on so that they can get as much details as they possibly can. Another example, I used to do this when in my classes all the time, where I would pass out Post-it notes and I would put a picture up, and instead of just saying, all right, what do you see? And then having a few or two or three overeager students raise their hand and share it out loud, I had everyone write down something that they see in the picture that they don't think others are going to see. So what would be some unique details that they think others would miss? They would write it down on a Post-it note, and then I would have them come up to the front of the class and they would put that Post-it note right there on the screen. And then we would all take a look at the Post-it notes that are on there. And that really helps to point out what were the unobvious things that people might have missed. So that potentially could be a strategy. And of course, and Matt, I can almost guarantee you used to do this, use magic paper. Now, if you have no idea what magic paper is, this young lady right here is actually demonstrating it. This piece of paper right here isn't really magical. What it is it's just a blank piece of paper, but because the projector in her class is behind her, what she's able to do is to hold up that piece of paper a few inches away from the screen, and it will really help the students to focus in on one spot on that screen that's there. We've been doing magic paper for years and years and years. And I'll give you a funny story. I was doing a training in Austin, Texas, and this was back, 2000 or so. And I did a training. I showed everyone magic paper, and we did a visual discovery together. And I had a lady come up to me in the break, and she said, "Where can I buy magic paper?" I said, "Well, good news. You've got it probably in your classroom already. You don't have to go out and buy it." So magic paper is a really easy, low-tech way of getting a student to call out details that they see. And don't do it as a teacher, have them do it. That's part of the engagement. So again, taking it a little bit further from teacher-centered to more student-centered aspects of it. Now, the other thing that you could do, of course, is you could have them write down, what do you see? What are some of those things? And I think that's an important step to it too. A lot of times we'll take that and we'll add them as questions in our slide decks as a visual discovery. But if it were me, and I think Matt mentioned this, you don't have to take everything that we do for verbatim. You can take some leave from that. And so one of the things that I like to do with my students is, as they are detailing those out, scribble a note. And this is kind of a reverse T-chart essentially, and you'll see how this works. But on the left-hand side, we're going to write what do we see. So I'm going to have the students kind of detail some of those things. So they see a sledgehammer, they see a man with a camera, soldiers, graffiti, a wall, and apparently somebody saw David Hasselhoff in that picture, and I didn't realize that. But they're detailing what they see. Now, then we're ready to make some interpretations. So we've detailed what we see. So now we're going to make some inferences based on the images. And I'm going to challenge you to do that right now. If you look at this picture, there are different types of people. For example, in our Zoom right now, there are males and females. Okay, so I want you to look at this picture and I want you to classify some different groups of people, and try to come up with more than one classification of a people. But how would you classify the different groups of people that are there? Go ahead and pop that into the chat. I see active and passive, soldiers and commoners. Matt said photographers, leather jacket enthusiasts versus khaki enthusiasts. Very good. I love it. You're all on it early in the morning here. Now, I would follow up with a question on inference with my students and challenge them to give me the evidence for it. Now, they would have to point out what they see to back it up. So if we said photographers are in here, that you believe that somebody's a photographer, what evidence is there to support it? Then somebody's using what they see there in the picture to point it out. The other thing that I would ask is, can you tell what time of year this is by looking at this picture? What time of year do you believe this would be? What season, I should say, of the year would this image be? Some are saying fall. They have on jackets. Ironically, fall. Good. Now, some of you are bringing some content knowledge there. Appears dreary, so fall or winter. Yeah, we definitely see cold weather, attire in the picture here. So again, we're making some inferences. Nothing on there says, we don't see a calendar or anything like that. And if we didn't know anything about this particular event, there's nothing that's obvious, that's factual. It's an inference that we're making based on the season. So we make interpretations, but we have to back it up with things on what we see. Now, here's the key, is when your students are responding to questions inside your class, how can you know that they've moved from knowledge and comprehension to application and analysis, which is essentially what level 2 is all about? And it's with one key word. When your students are answering you and they use the word because as a part of it, that is a key indicator that they've moved from that more concrete to more abstract thinking. And that's an important step because we want the students to scale up. Now, after we interpret, which would be the what do you think, we're going to have them on that reverse T-chart, that upside down T-chart. I'm going to have them write it down. So I think he has a sledgehammer because he wants to tear down the wall. All right. So we could have asked, all right, why does this man have a sledgehammer? So I think he's trying to tear down the wall. Is there evidence to support it? Yeah, it appears that he's hitting it. So that's something I can use as an inference that would go right here. So that level 2 is an important step. Now, as is the final step on our journey, which is level 3, making a claim about what's going on. This is about what's happening and why it's happening. And so when you do this, you want to challenge the students to put everything together, all the things that they see, all the things that they think about those things that they see, and make the next step. Why is this event being photographed? Why is this event important? And so they will then go ahead and make a claim using all of that evidence that they've gathered together. So people want this wall torn down because the walls divide people. One picture, you could almost teach the fall of the Soviet bloc, you might say, at that time, just with this one picture, by having them start with it. Now, what we haven't done yet here, we haven't driven them to the content where they can verify their claims and make sure that they've gathered as much content about it as they can. They may not have the context of what this specific event was all about yet. So this is all at the entrance. This is at the very beginning of the lesson itself. Those 3 steps, gathering evidence, interpreting evidence, and then creating a claim from the evidence, that is what we call at TCI the detective analogy. And that's why we have the picture of Scooby-Doo and Luther and the Pikachu or whatever that was there. So let's test you out here. So what level, 1, 2, or 3, do you think this question would be? So here's the picture that I'm showing. And the question that I would be asking students is, where do you think this photograph was taken? Is that a level 1 question, a level 2 question, or a level 3 question? Put it into the chat and then tell me why you think it's either level 1, level 2, or level 3. Don't just put the number in there. Tell me why. I would argue that the critical mass of people that have responded so far are pretty correct, that this is a level 2 question. There is ample evidence here to support what some people are saying, that it's a grocery store, but we have to make an inference. We do that based on our experience, right? That we've been in stores, we have seen shelves that look like these right here. We can see in the background things that may indicate that it is in some sort of a store, because if I read that, it looks like it says customer service in the background. But every time that I keep saying something like that, think of the word because. So this is a level 2 question. So I didn't do these in order. I tricked you a little bit. Let me give you another one. So this picture, what do you see? Is that level 1, 2, or 3?
Same picture.
Same picture. So far, Jonathan's the only one that's answered. That's right. It is, you are correct. It is level 1. There's no inference involved. You're just cataloging. What do you see? There are 2 things of Charmin right there. There is, I don't even know what these things are right there, but there is a shower scrunchie underneath of it. But these stocks, these shelves are pretty bare. I see boxes, open boxes. So when the students are detailing what they see. That's that level one. We're gathering the evidence. And then, of course, by default, the only one that I haven't shown you yet, this one is level 3, but I'm going to have you tell me why. Why is this one a level 3 question? What event caused this dilemma? So put it into the chat. Why must this one be 3? Beyond that, I've already done 2 and 1. Why is this one a level 3? Synthesis. You have to use evidence, prior knowledge, deeper thinking. You're asking for a claim. You're asking somebody to take a step out, right? Yes, like that, a requirement of synthesis. And thank you to whoever pointed out that these cover the shower drain to catch the hair. You can obviously tell that is not a concern of mine frequently, but thank you so much. All right. So after we've done the carefully sequencing of questions, we're then now ready to get them into the content. So this is where we want to get them to read about the image and apply what they've learned. Okay, so it's at this point that if you're creating a visual discovery from scratch and you get through step 3, this is where your content comes in. Is now you're ready to go ahead and give them that meaty content, drive them to it, but also with a task involved. They got to do something with it. And so an example here is, we can see on the left-hand side, there is a selection of text on the ending of the Cold War. This really powerful visual of President Reagan there in the background in front of oh gosh, mine went blank there, the Vandenberg Gate, I believe. So what we actually see here is the picture that would associate this with the content and the text that's there. I'm going to drive my students to read about it, but they're also going to analyze the image at the same time. So when they look at the picture, we're going to ask them the questions. Notice here, I'm going level 1, 2, 3. So what interesting details do people see in this image? How did Reagan's speech hasten the tearing down of the Berlin Wall? There, I'm driving them into the text. And then they've also got to answer this question: what was the impact of the Berlin Wall on foreign policy? That's going to make a claim, because they've got to go out there on the edge and say, well, this is what I think the impact was. Now, when they do their text, there's awesome tools that they can use within their TCI program that will even help them. So for example, if you've not been in there lately to see what's there, your students can click on a main idea viewer. And when they click on a main idea viewer, what it does is it bolds the key sentences that are in the text itself. Now, if you're making something on your own and you're providing the content, maybe this isn't something that you're using. But if it's a lesson that you're using from us and this is right there, just note what your students can do with it that will really help them to make sense of whatever these images are. So have them click the main idea viewer and put mark it up, even maybe give that a color. And I'm going to go through here and I'm going to mark up that for just this one section, all of the main ideas from it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at it in a different light. So I've marked up all of the main ideas in that section right there. And I could read just those statements there alone. Of course, there's other things that I also want to read as a student, but at the end, those are the main ideas. And so when I look at this over in my notes over here, now that I've marked it up, I can see on June 12, 1987, President Reagan stood on a platform in front of the Berlin Wall. Reagan emphatically commanded Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Reagan issued a ringing challenge from one superpower to the other. And on the night of November 9th, 1989, a little 2 years later, the gates of the Berlin Wall finally opened. So if I take those statements and then apply them backwards to the pictures that we were looking at here, it now gets me to the so what. Now it gets me to the point to where I can really add some context to it, put some meat on the bone. So you really challenge your students to read that text, but give them a specific purpose to be looking for, and that is to back up their claims. So after you've done this, have them interact with the image. We're not done. I mean, we've got them to the point of the content, but let's go ahead and drive it all the way home by having them do one last step, and that is to interact with the image to demonstrate what they've learned, to show the HOTS, the higher order thinking skills. And there's lots of ways in which you can do this. In a lot of TCI lessons, especially like middle school and elementary lessons, will sometimes have what we call an acted out. We have them in our high school program too. They're age appropriate, so it'll be based on whatever you're doing in class. But the idea is that you would step in to the picture itself and actually become a part of it and bring it to life. Maybe speak as one of the characters that are in there to demonstrate that you really understand the moment that was being captured. But there's other variations of that as well. And one of them would be to challenge students to write a caption. So if the students were having started with the lesson, looking at this picture on the right over here, then they read about it, and then I challenged them, all right, let's say you're a photo editor, you're getting ready to work for Time Magazine, and they're getting ready to publish this, but you've got to add in a caption to go with this picture before it goes out for publication. What are you going to say? And challenge your students to put the caption for the picture, which would demonstrate that they really understand the significance of what's being viewed. So that would be an option. It doesn't always have to be students stepping into the visual. That would be an option that would get at the very same task. Or perhaps it's writing a headline. Why is this going in the newspaper? Why is it on CNN or Fox or whatever they're watching? Why is that picture going to be utilized? And so develop a headline that would draw readers' attention to what you're showing. Of course, 21st century. And I put on here, write a tweet, but maybe it's a TikTok instead of a tweet. Twitter's been around, it feels like forever, but it's only been around a little bit more than 10 years. But of course, social media, of course, is transforming, and people communicate electronically these days really quickly. So what would a tweet look like, or a Facebook post, or a TikTok that would be about that particular event? How interesting would that be? As a matter of fact, we're doing a little work on adding some what we call video activities to our middle school programs, which you all get probably next year sometime. And one of the activities that I'm creating right now has students looking at what appears to be a TikTok of some of the early founders of the United States, and they have to determine what's going on in the TikTok that they're viewing. It's a visual discovery lesson. So there's lots of ways in which you could do this. Another one of my favorites is what we call a face-off. And this is one in which you take the class and you have them oppose one another. Or perhaps you pair students up and they sit knee to knee, and they look into the eyes of the person that they are opposing, and you give each eye a question that they have to respond to, and the other side has to listen to it, and then you give them a chance to be able to respond to it, and then you swap, and you have the right side take a question and they respond back. There's a really great activity in the Pursuing American Ideals program on the counterculture movement, on how folks from the 1950s and the hippies would have seen two different events, how they would have seen the same event, I should say, from different perspectives. And so it's a really great lesson for all the visuals that are there, but you do a talk it out, a face off, as a way for students to be able to demonstrate that they really understand everything that they read and how it ties to the pictures that they've been analyzing. Love that lesson. They could also step into a picture instead of becoming a person. Maybe they are an inanimate object. Maybe you have them be the Bastille, and they are describing what's happening in the late 1700s there with these French peasants that are uprising there. So maybe they become an inanimate object, and from the point of view of what they see, what they've seen, what they heard, what they felt, really tap into the five senses. That would also be an example of something that you can do. And folks, those are the 5 steps. They also happen to fall in line. There's lots of good research to support these steps in a visual discovery. We've been using it since 1989, but other work has come out since then to really back up this kind of an approach. And Zaretta Hammond and her work comes to mind, where she writes about igniting, chunking information, allowing students to chew on it, and then review it. And if you think about her 4 steps, Zaretta Hammond's 4 steps, ignite, chunk, chew, and review, they definitely find a home in this strategy, as well as all the others at TCI. Now, I want to make sure I save some time for questions, but before I do that, let me just kind of pose again where this fits in the overall kind of scheme of what we have at TCI in terms of strategies. This is just one lesson, just one type of a lesson. There are 6 others. All of them teach content, but they each have a little bit of a different flavor. This one, the visual discovery, the whole intent was to supercharge that lecture that's been so common. So when you're looking at the others, they have their own purposes as well. Experiential lessons, writing lessons, discussion lessons, problem solving lessons, and skill-based lessons all have their place inside of a classroom. So I'm going to close with a question for you, and then we'll throw it open to any questions that folks have before we wrap up. And what I'd like you to do is let's revisit where we started here. How is visual discovery more effective than a traditional lecture? So it is a lecture, but it's extra, right? As my daughter and son would say, it's extra. So how is it more effective than a traditional lecture? I'd like you to take a few moments and go ahead and pop that into the chat. And while you're doing that, if you have any questions, now's a good time to go off of mute and say, hey, Brian, I've got a question, and fire away. I've got our account here in the background. And if you've got a question about the visual discovery strategy, I'd be more than happy to entertain it. Love the items going into the chat there, more engaging, students using more senses. Jennifer, that's a powerful image. I believe I know the one that you're talking about, Falling Man. Eye candy, more of a conversation like that. That's a good way to say that. Actual event, it makes it relevant, makes them feel, you know, a part owner of what they're viewing, right? Way to time travel. I like that, Ron. Thank you. Excellent. Helps you remember the information. And again, you can, and Timothy, you're absolutely right. There are super, super powerful images out of Ukraine that you could be doing or using inside your class. And again, that kind of shows you that this is a portable strategy. All of these are, but especially this one right here. It's a portable strategy, meaning it doesn't have to be something that is especially prepackaged, that has to be perfect. It can be extemporaneous. It can be something that you do, you know, at a moment's notice once you know the steps. I used to go to the teacher store. I can't remember what it was called, but it was, we had one right around the corner from where I taught at Hopewell Junior School. There was a teacher supply store, and they used to sell these quick flips in there that had Bloom's taxonomy. And if you know what I'm talking about, you would start with knowledge and comprehension, and you'd flip it over on the back side, and there would be all these question starters. that would start with knowledge and comprehension, and then it would have the next and next and next until you got all the way down to evaluation. And I used to keep that on my desk for the express purpose of, if I ever felt like I needed to do a visual discovery at a moment's notice, that I could pick it up and begin using the questions from there with the pictures that I was using. So I was able to, get into step 1, 2, and 3 really quickly, just with that one little tool right there. So that's just something to consider. I'm sure they have an updated version of that that's probably digital and that you can have on your phone. I don't know these days. Matt, are there any observations or questions that you want to pepper me with before we close out?
No, I want to say thank you, Brian. That's excellent. And I've linked a published version of Brian's presentation to the overall presentation for today too. So those of you, and I'll put that in the chat once we get started. Are there questions that you have for Brian? Again, this is year 1 implementation. So we're even though some of you probably have been using these strategies for years, I know a few of us who've been around for a while and had History Live training back in 2005 when some of you were in elementary school. That's always the weird part to say now, but we're just getting started with some of these, and I think as you use them and become comfortable with the strategy, and you'll find ways to adapt and use what's in the text. I think it's great. But are there other questions for Brian or anything? I have a little bit more that I'll share in this session before we wrap up, but yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Taylor.